What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So getting into the Iron Nail, the story when Steve Rogers loses the super soldier serum, this is super cool. Like, it's definitely one of my Captain America, my favorite Captain America stories, because it just seems like a natural progression, right? I mean, we knew as the reader that like a time will come when Steve Rogers will just stop being Captain America. And it makes sense. I mean, after a while, you can only ever tell so many stories. There's only so many times when you can read about Steve Rogers running into the battlefield, Avengers assemble, freedom! Like, there's only so many times before it's like, okay, let's get something a little bit new. But the idea here was that when this initially dropped, it was very divisive in the community. People absolutely began to freak out. You know, Captain America purists lost their minds. They could not imagine anybody besides Steve Rogers playing the role of Captain America. They were just kind of trapped in that mindset. At the same time, you had people who wanted to see Captain America kind of just remain the hero that they always envisioned. They weren't really locked into the character, but for them, it's just Steve Rogers was always Captain America. And so it created kind of like one of those interesting scenarios. But for me, I always loved this. I always loved this story. I loved the idea of simply seeing somebody else carry the mantle, even if it was only going to be for a temporary amount of time, or even if it was permanent. I always thought it would be kind of cool. And in truth, I loved what Hickman did with Captain America in Avengers and New Avengers, where he's just like this old man, cynical and angry at the world, and just like running S.H.I.E.L.D., trying to get revenge on the Illuminati. It was kind of cool. It was really an interesting concept. But again, what we also get is this depiction of what it is that Dr. Mindbubble does, in the sense that, remember, in the last video, we talked about how Nuke was just this crazy military guy. He was basically trying to win wars that had long since been over. And so he was going into international territories or going into other countries, into sovereign states, shooting their people up, planting American flags, and it threatened to create an international incident. And so the result was that he was basically captured by Captain America and Sam Wilson as Falcon, and then kept prisoner on a S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier, only for us to find out that he was being used by the Iron Nail. A bomb was put inside of him and he was detonated, resulting in the deaths of some 160 some odd, S.H.I.E.L.D. agents, the destruction of the helicarrier, and Nuke himself. And so again, what Dr. Mindbubble does, or at least what this little tidbit does, is it basically picks up with Frank Simpson having single-handedly won the war. And that's really what his dream is, and that's how Dr. Mindbubble works. He has the ability to manipulate reality around individuals, but only insofar that he traps their minds inside of a reality bubble. So he's not like Franklin Richards or like Molecule Man or anything like that. He can't inherently alter reality itself. He simply just kind of creates an illusion inside the mind of the people who were trapped in his bubbles, and then they believe it to be an absolute truth. And so because of this, this is really just designed by Mindbubble to essentially allow Frank Simpson to experience the passing over process without really suffering or struggling. Now, in truth, I mean, the guy's got a giant hole in his chest, so I guess it kind of works. But the fact remains here that we also have Mindbubble encountering Ran Shin. Now, keep in mind, Ran Shin, the Iron Nail, had been the hidden hand behind all of this. He had been on this campaign to take down S.H.I.E.L.D. for years and years and years and years. And again, a lot of this is rooted in the fact that he felt betrayed by S.H.I.E.L.D. in the sense that he was an agent at one point along the line. He was assigned to infiltrate communist China. He eventually became this kind of corrupted guy by having the Shaolin Scientist Squad, there we go, was ultimately, kind of ousted by Mao himself, and then eventually recaptured by S.H.I.E.L.D. again. And so because of that, he'd essentially lost his mind. He'd kind of gone drunk with power. And so the result was that he's basically waging a war against S.H.I.E.L.D. and trying to bring down S.H.I.E.L.D. in its entirety. Now, in truth, this is kind of a reflection of the larger picture. S.H.I.E.L.D. is only one facet. For Ran Shin, it's really more of taking down the establishment, taking down all these various individuals. And we see this play out when we end up having, Captain America and Jet Black, again, the kind of, dimensional displaced daughter of Arnim Zola, walking side by side. Now, the cool thing about this is keep in mind, Rick Remender is not teasing any sort of romance here. I mean, he's not really saying, well, Jet Black and Steve Rogers, they might become something. It's not really going to work that way. In truth, Jet Black is battle hardened. She views the world wildly different than Steve Rogers does. She's ruthless. She's like, look, there are two types of people in this world. There's criminals and there's people who are not criminals. Criminals should die, and that's the end of that. She's very Punisher-like in terms of how she functions and in terms of what she does, whereas Captain America is a lot more lenient. Everyone deserves a second chance and that kind of a thing. And so the reason why this sort of moral quandary plays out is because they basically end up, as they're walking along, they end up running into a guy who's effectively one of these, big shot Wall Street bankers, who's just kind of pissed off because they're not giving out enough bad loans and not making him enough money and so on and so forth. But the Shaolin Scientist Squad intervenes with the intention of whisking this guy away. And that's what Ran Shin's been doing. He's been sending his scientist squad out into the world and then capturing those individuals who prey on others. Now, it's not just bankers, it's, like the wealthy elite, different things like that. And that's the war that he's been waging. And that's really kind of the moral quandary that's being asked here, like with Wall Street bankers and different things like that. Who's really at fault here? The person who issued the loan or the person who signed their name on the dotted line of the loan they knew they couldn't afford? So that's why it creates kind of a funny scenario. And there's only really so much you can do. If after the mortgage crisis in 2008, an army, or vigilantes had walked into Wall Street and started carrying off all these Wall Street bankers, people probably wouldn't have batted an eye. They probably would have said, yeah, man, they deserve it. But then if they said, okay, phase 2 is now to also take away those people who signed their names on the dotted lines of homes they couldn't afford, well, then suddenly people would start freaking out and there would be excuses galore. Well, I didn't know, all that kind of good stuff. And so because of that, it creates kind of this interesting scenario. The fact remains here that this is tried and true Steve Rogers. At the end of the day, despite the fact that this guy is effectively a corporate criminal, despite the fact that this guy is doing some pretty heinous things, he hasn't broken any literal laws yet. He hasn't actually broken a particular law. Instead, he's just a really shady Wall Street guy. And so Captain America is beholden to the law and the law only. And that's the way his character always functioned, is the sense that he always went against individuals who violated the law. Captain America was beholden to the law itself. He wasn't beholden to a government. He wasn't beholden to the average person. He was beholden to the law and to freedom. If laws began to encroach on freedom, then he would in turn battle against those laws and battle on the side of freedom. And so because of those things, he was very much a patriotic character. He was very much a guy that was a reflection of average and normal society. The funny thing about this is that we end up having the Shaolin scientist squad basically just kind of like whisk away, more or less teleport when the battle is over. And Steve Rogers is really just kind of left to allow this guy to be taken by the cops, to be taken for treatment and so on and so forth. And so again, Steve Rogers himself is really facing this moral quandary because he looks around and says, look, man, you're a shady banker guy. Like, the world would legitimately be better off without you. If you just vanished, if these guys had taken you away and you were working in some cave, the world would not mourn you. The world would not miss you. There's nothing in your life of any significance. And so we'd be fine without you, but at the end of the day, he is beholden to the law. He's beholden to freedom. He's beholden to the idea that people who commit crimes or do bad things should be held accountable for that within the confines of the law. And that's really kind of the nature, that's the knife's edge that Captain America walks. Because all it would ever really take, and this is an argument that he's made time and time again, this is an argument that's been made in Marvel Comics time and time again, especially during the first Civil War. All it takes is making it acceptable one time. All it takes is for someone to come along and say, yeah, that person did something bad. But the problem is, if there was a trial, they would probably get away with it. Let's just nix the trial and just take them out in a public square and shoot them. Let's just do that, because then we don't have to worry about it. And sure, it would be more efficient. Executing people for their crimes, statistically speaking, does not prevent people from committing crimes. It's not a deterrent, but it does prevent repeat offenders. A person can't commit a crime again if they're dead. And so because of that, it'd be so much easier, and it would certainly smooth the process out if people were just executed on the spot for the crimes that they commit. But if you do that once, then you can do it twice. And if you can do it twice, you can do it 3 times, and then 4 times, and 5 times, and suddenly it becomes the societal standard. Structure, organization, society itself breaks down on a fundamental level, and it's nothing but the Wild West. It's just a bunch of crazy people running around with guns, shooting each other up because one guy has something another guy wants. And so because of that, in order to maintain structure, in order to maintain order, rules have to be imposed. Right, wrong, or otherwise, they are there. And Captain America fights on behalf of those so long as they do not encroach on people's freedom. And so again, it makes a really cool scenario when it comes to his character, how he functions, and how he exists. And so what we end up finding out here is that in the aftermath of the destruction of this helicarrier, we essentially have, Steve Rogers basically showing up at the behest of Maria Hill, and she of course informs him that Weapons Minus is basically free, and that Weapon Minus, again, basically Dr. Mind Bubble, was created to be a deterrent for Steve Rogers, for Wolverine, for all those different guys. It was S.H.I.E.L.D.'s answer to Weapon Plus. And so because of that, Jed also uses her Omni senses, her ability to push any one of her senses to the infinite peak, and simply, use her sight to realize that, Sam Wilson is still alive, which of course they end up rescuing him. But again, the role of Dr. Mind Bubble begins to come into play when we have Nick Fury Jr., who has been taken by Mind Bubble. And while he sees inside this illusion that he's basically tracking down Hydra, that Hydra's trying to access something called the gun gear, ultimately, this is really just Mind Bubble using Nick Fury to activate the machinery itself. Now, we'll actually find out what that is, and it's really, really cool. But this is when we basically get this whole exposition on what it is that Dr. Mind Bubble is about. Of course, we have Captain America and we have Falcon trying to track down Nick Fury, as well as Mind Bubble and so on. But we end up finding out, at least from what they're told by Maria Hill, that initially, when Weapons Plus was first launched with Weapon Zero, with Captain America Steve Rogers and Project Rebirth, and when the Weapons Plus project was turned into Weapon 1 and Weapon Weapon 2 and Weapon 3, going all the way up to Weapons 10 or Weapons X with Wolverine, and then eventually going into Deadpool and then so on and so forth, that S.H.I.E.L.D. realized that if super soldiers were being cranked out in this kind of variation and in these extremes, S.H.I.E.L.D. would need a countermeasure. The problem with this was that this guy, Horace Littleton, the one who was leading the project, could not find any legit volunteers after he had basically taken LSD and merged it with the super soldier serum. Now, the answer is not given to us in terms of how he was able to locate the super soldier serum, because keep in mind, that's the whole core of Captain America. Dr. Abraham Erskine formed the super soldier serum. The super soldier serum was originally intended to be a deterrent against the expansion of mutants in the Marvel Universe. The result is that, following the creation of Captain America, Abraham Erskine was killed by the Germans, and the secret of the super soldier serum was lost with him. Weapons, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, going all the way up to Wolverine and Deadpool, those were all basically attempts to either duplicate the super soldier serum or create something wholly different. And so because of that, we don't know how, it is that Horace Littleton got the super soldier serum. If it's even the legit serum itself, it could just be a spinoff. Because there were no volunteers, he basically used it on himself. And what it did is it gave him the ability to create these mind-altering bubbles that are composed of literal LSD and super soldier serum, and then impose those bubbles on other people, forcing them to see whatever it is that's inside there. Now again, Horace Littleton does not control what people see inside that bubble. The bubbles are basically just emitted from his mind and sort of thrown out there, and that's really about it. I mean, the structure is created by him, the environment is created by him, but in terms of how people experience things, in terms of those individuals who talk to them, Horace does not have control of that. In the case of Nick Fury, for example, it's just, here is a dream where Nick Fury is helping to track down Hydra and helping to defeat Hydra. And then whatever goes on inside that dream is basically up to Nick Fury himself in terms of how his mind construes it. But the fact remains here that with Horace Littleton behind the wheel and with Iron Nail continuing to control everything behind the scenes, this ultimately leads to a direct conflict between these two S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers. They literally just crash into one another. Now, of course, Captain America is doing what he can to face off against these various guys, try to bring this helicarrier down in its entirety. But the fact remains that with these two S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarriers being forced to crash, with all of this happening under the control of Mind Bubble himself, it inevitably leads to a conflict directly between Captain America and Iron Nail. Now, this is effectively when Captain America begins to lose the super soldier serum. And the reason why is because of the fact that, remember, Ran Shen basically has the ability to emit these tendrils that will absorb energies out of people. It'll basically absorb what it is that makes them who they are, their life force or something along those lines. But even then, it's not explicitly explained. It's really more of like a plot device than anything else. We don't know, for example, if Iron Nail would be able to attack Kitty Pryde and then absorb her X gene. We don't know if he would be able to do things like that. He probably wouldn't. The only indication we have of what he can do is when he basically absorbed the Infinity Formula, the formula that made Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan young, when he absorbed that serum out of them, and then Nick Fury and Dum Dum Dugan grew really old really fast. That's the only indication of what it is that he can do. And even Captain America makes that comment. He doesn't know what Iron Nail can do. All he knows is that Iron Nail is dangerous and somebody that needs to be dealt with. Now, this is kind of Rick Remender playing on the nature of Captain America, right? I mean, Captain America isn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, he's smart, but he's really more of let's form a plan, somebody else give me the intelligence that I need, and then when I have that intelligence, then we'll form a plan on what it is that we should do. I mean, it's very indicative of what you would expect from a leader. A leader doesn't have to know everything. A leader just needs to be able to surround himself with effective people who know their information, so that way he can play the role of consolidating all that information, bringing it together, and making it a cohesive plan. That's why Captain America was always a leader of the Avengers, but that's why people like Iron Man are so essential, because they always had an intrinsic role to play. You had Tony Stark, you had Hank Pym, some of the smartest people. You always had a brain guy as part of the Avengers so that you would have that intelligence aspect, and Captain America could use that in order to form his own plans. And so again, in the midst of this conflict, it's exactly as we would expect. Mind Bubble arrives and traps Captain America inside one of these bubbles. And this is when we basically learn the heart's desire of Steve Rogers, what it is that he wants above all else. He is surrounded by friends. He does have Jet Black. He does have Nick Fury. Bucky Barnes is there. It's really this idea of, hey man, you made it out alive and you saved all of us. It's so great that you pulled this off. The world is celebrating what it is that you've done. There's parades, all that kind of good stuff. But it's also the arrival, or I guess the fact that Ian is still alive, his son, who's, basically dead, as well as Sharon Carter, who's still alive, who's effectively been discovered. And so because of that, this is really kind of like the perfect life of Steve Rogers. The parade is a reflection of what we would have expected to see, because had Captain America not been frozen during World War II, when the conflict was over, this is what he would have seen at home. He would have seen parades, streamers, celebration, all that kind of good stuff. He would have seen all of that. At the same time, with regards to Sharon Carter and Ian, it's basically him having a family. He's a husband and he's a father. And so because of that, his his life is basically complete. He saved the superhero community and he's got a family of his own. This is really what it is that he wants the most, but in the end, he can't bring himself to accept it because in his mind, it's too perfect. Now, this is kind of interesting because with Captain America, we always kind of looked at him. We always kind of looked at Steve Rogers and said, okay, this is a guy who is a reflection of an archaic time. This is a guy who is a reflection of an age when things were a little more pure, naive perhaps, but it's not a reflection of the modern day. It's just not how things are. People don't talk to each other the way that they used to. They don't, engage in the kind of things the way they used to. And there's all different kinds of arguments you can extrapolate for that. But the fact remains here that with Steve Rogers himself looking out on this and saying there's no possible way that I could be living in a world that's perfect. The world doesn't exist this way anymore. They don't do parades when wars are won. They don't do things like that. If this is the world, then this is not the real world. This is not my world. To have my wife or have my future wife back, to have my son back, to have saved all the superheroes, it doesn't work that way. The mission's over, we get debriefed, and then we get briefed on the next mission. That's just how it functions. That's just how it goes. There's a million reasons for why this world can't be real. And so, of course, Steve Rogers does the only thing you can do when it comes to escaping a mind bubble. He basically commits suicide. And that indeed is the only way to get out of a mind bubble. When you're trapped in one, you basically have to kill yourself. But this is why it's so dangerous, is because if the world around you shifts and you believe it's legitimately real, and you don't have the ability to distinguish between what's real and what's false, then it's like putting a gun in the hand of a schizophrenic. Is the world that they're living in with the gun real, or is the world without the gun real? Which one is true and which one is false? And so that's the crazy situation. It's because if you weren't able to tell the difference, you could be standing in the real world out of the effects of a mind bubble, and people are telling you, no, do not pull that trigger. You're in the real world. But to you, you're not in the real world. You're in the mind bubble. The gun goes to the side of your head, the trigger gets pulled, and you are dead. That's it. There's no coming back. And so because that's what makes Dr. Mind Bubble so dangerous, is because the shift between real and false could take place, and you would just never know. The fact remains here that with Steve Rogers escaping, this leads directly into a conflict between himself and Iron Nail. Yet again, this battle between the two of them. Now, of course, Mind Bubble is more or less, incapacitated when Steve Rogers throws a shield at Mind Bubble's head, blocks the access port where the bubbles come out from, and the result is that his mind just starts filling up with all of his own dreams, and he really kind of goes crazy, and that's the end of that. But we also end up finding out that this gun gear, this device that they've basically accessed, is a Gundam, is a giant Gundam. No, it's actually just a giant machine, really just kind of like a giant robot, which I guess it is a Gundam, but it's a weapon that S.H.I.E.L.D. had created. It's a weapon S.H.I.E.L.D. had created for the purpose of deterring and battling against a massive threat. Now, it's not being used for the purpose of incapacitating the Hulk, because truth be told, depending on how strong this machinery is, despite how big it is, the Hulk could probably still tear it apart. So it doesn't really matter on that kind of scale. The idea is that it's really just another weapon created by S.H.I.E.L.D. And so the result is that where, this is basically being accessed by Iron Nail, and it's going to be used for the intention of just kind of obliterating, society as a whole, and then sort of restructuring everything under Iron Nail himself. The battle between Captain America and Ran Shin ultimately leads to Steve Rogers, having to go to the central access core, throwing a shield, basically destroying the core, thereby destroying the robot. And in the process, while he is able to get his shield off, he's impaled by these tendrils, which begin draining out the super soldier serum from his body. And the result is that once it's all said and done, Ran Shin is effectively defeated, and then we basically have old man Steve Rogers. He's now lost his super soldier serum, and that's effectively the end of him. And so what this does is it sets the stage for a story called The Tomorrow Soldier, which will begin the process of bringing in Sam Wilson as the new Captain America in all new, all different Captain America. So again, if you guys are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Court. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, all this stuff. We have like 2 more videos, and then we basically end up picking up with Secret Wars, or really all new, all different Marvel. So hopefully, with regards to the way these videos end, because we have the Tomorrow Soldier, then we have all new Captain America, and then we're done. And so hopefully the way that all new Captain America ends for you guys, you'll literally be able to finish that one and then just go directly into all new, all different Marvel with Captain America Sam Wilson #1, and just find this perfect segue between these two things. And so that's why we're putting all this before the Secret Empire, before the all new, all different Marvel video stuff, so you guys can just kind of watch it all in chronological order. But anyway, guys, we're gonna go ahead and bring this video to an end, and I will catch you all later. Peace.